One. Oh, no.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to what's almost the end of the evidence. And start just with the usual policy about the health and safety issues. Doors that came in are the exit doors. If we're having an emergency, we need a safe sale house outside. Those same doors are the availability, meeting the availability of toilet facilities, and otherwise I ask everybody to just make sure their cell phones are turned off. And that out of the way, Mr. Christensen, we're in your hands this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora koutou. So, firstly, let me apologise for not wearing a tie, and for, as my client kindly says, sounding a bit like a chipmunk. I've had a procedure done to my neck, which means that my voice is a bit troubled at the moment. So, hopefully, I'll be okay to talk to you for a few minutes.
Right.
So we've handed up some submissions, summary of Ms. Hunter's evidence, which also has attached to it the provisions that she's promoting, and also a case that I'm going to refer to briefly.
Thank you.
Turning to the submissions, these submissions are on behalf of Oceana Gold New Zealand Limited. This is the last time that Oceana Gold will appear before you in this hearing. I intend to take this opportunity to provide a brief overview of Oceana Gold's position in relation to the proposed regional policy statement before commenting in more detail on the land and freshwater chapter's provisions and how these should be changed to reflect a more appropriate policy position. At the outset, I note that the Commissioner's task has been made more difficult than it needed to be by the way ORC has elected to conduct itself in relation to the development of an appropriate policy response to the needs of Otago's important mineral extractive industry. In opening submissions, counsel for the ORC explained the reasons why an entirely new RPS was being proposed when the ink on the partially operative RPS was scarcely dry. Those reasons are fair and reflect both the changing nature of superior instruments to which the RPS must give effect, as well as a recognition by the ORC that its policies around freshwater management were not fit for purpose. The fundamental difficulty the pORPS has created for Oceana Gold and others that have appeared before you over the past weeks as you have worked your way through the document is that for reasons never explained and without any defensible cost-benefit analysis, the ORC took it upon itself to make fundamental changes to its policy statement in areas unrelated to the reasons it is given for promoting an entirely new instrument. And in particular, the notified version of the pORPS removed policy recognition for extractives and removed consenting pathways for extractive industries, which had been in the 2019 regional policy statement, and the ORC did so without justification or explanation. Council then failed to grasp the significance of removing these policies. Oceana Gold is unsure whether even now ORC understands the implications of the provisions it promotes and looks forward with interest to what ORC will say in closing. Post-notification and after submissions were lodged, there was an opportunity for ORC to constructively engage with submitters in the pre-hearing process. Through that process, Oceana Gold engaged in good faith in the expectation that once ORC appreciated the provisions in the 2019 RPS that recognised the importance of the extractives industry in Otago and which provided consenting pathways and acknowledgement of mineral extraction's operational and functional need to locate where minerals naturally occur had not found their way into the current document as notified, the ORC as a responsible local authority would move to rectify the problem that had created. Oceana Gold was concerned to be told that ORC had no intention of doing any work to correct the position, and that if Oceana Gold wanted it corrected, it would have to propose a remedy. As the hearing process has unfolded, ORC has belatedly begun the task of coming to grips with the problems that need to be addressed in relation to mining and quarrying, but has done so in my submission in a reactionary and haphazard manner. The position Oceana Gold finds itself in today, as it presents for the last time, is that firstly, the planners advising the industry submitters, including Ms. Hunter for Oceana Gold, have agreed on the wording of a new issue statement to be included in the significant resource management chapter, management issues chapter, to address the total failure of that chapter to identify that appropriate access to and use of resources in Otago is essential in order to enable people and communities to provide for their social, economic and cultural wellbeing. The Regional Council has not provided any indication of whether it agrees with this formulation of the issue, or indeed whether it even accepts access to resources is an important issue in Otago. In that regard, given that the Council now proposes some policy recognition of the particular needs of mineral extraction, it begs the question why, as to why those provisions are included, if not because access to mineral resources is an important regional issue. Secondly, some acknowledgement of minerals and mining is now suggested by the Council in the UFD chapter. While this is welcome, it falls short of providing the necessary policy recognition of the locational and functional needs of extractives as is contained in the partially operative RPS. In response to this, Ms Hunter proposes some policy wording which could be included in the Land and Soils chapter, but which could also be included in the UFD chapter if that is the preference. And I should just say at this point that Ms Hunter is an independent planner, is providing evidence as to what she considers is the appropriate, the best way to deal with the issues. But it's accepted that there are other ways it could be done. And ultimately, it would be great if the Regional Council, which holds the pen, was to promote what it considers as the best way to deal with it, but not simply to not deal with it, which has been the approach hitherto. And thirdly, a consenting pathway for minerals development where it intersects with significant biodiversity is now proposed in the Eco chapter. Again, this is welcome, but does require some adjustment, as Oceana Gold indicated when the topic was heard. And I'm going to return to that just briefly at the end when I refer you to the Environment Court case that was released yesterday. It will not be lost on the Commissioners that without proper recognition of the importance of mineral extraction in the significant resource management issues chapter and in other parts of the regional policy statement, the recognition of a consenting pathway where significant biodiversity values are affected is not properly supported in the document when read as a whole, reflecting the lack of integration in the haphazard way ORC has developed the document. Oceana Gold is not after a free pass for mining. Oceana Gold is seeking a sensible and balanced policy statement which acknowledges the important contribution of mining to the economic, social and cultural wellbeing of Otago's people and communities. A document that recognises and provides for the locational constraints of mining, as mining must locate where the resources are, and like infrastructure, requires large-scale landforms and is for these reasons disproportionately impacted by inflexible avoid policies. In a document which acknowledges that the economic extraction of important mineral resources may coincide with areas of high ecological, heritage, landscape and cultural value, and that there needs to be a consenting pathway for mining to show that any unavoidable adverse effects on those other values can be appropriately managed. This recognition is certainly not a free pass, and if an applicant cannot demonstrate that adverse effects are able to be appropriately managed, consents will not be granted. Mining is a significant industry in Otago, and the regional policy statement needs to acknowledge mining and needs to provide guidance on how it will be provided for and what considerations and balances need to be achieved. It's not sufficient to refer to a smattering of discrete references to primary production as providing support for mining. That isn't the structure required for regional policy statements under Section 62 of the Act. The RPS needs to state the region's significant resource management issues, the objectives the regional policy statement seeks to achieve, the policies in relation to those issues and objectives, an explanation of the policies, the methods other than rules to be used to implement policies, the principal reasons for adopting the various objectives, policies and methods, and the environmental results anticipated from implementation of the policies and methods. So I'm really just referring to what Section 62 says. It is therefore clear that there needs to be a traceable and logical flow from issues to objectives and policies, or putting it another way, there needs to be vertical support and connection in the form of objectives and issues for each policy. When the regional significance of minerals is considered, the haphazard and evolving way the ORC has chosen to address this issue means that the coherence Section 62 requires of an RPS is lacking. Ms Hunter proposes some additions and amendments to various provisions to achieve the necessary linkages and coherence, and she will discuss these with you shortly. Her recommendations are supported by Oceana Gold and in my submission are suitable for adoption by the Commissioners as an appropriate way to address the regional importance of the extractive sector and the need for extractive activities to be managed with care, given the known overlaps that can exist between important mineral deposits and other important values. The approach she recommends is consistent with the way infrastructure is addressed and consistent with the way minerals are addressed in the partially operative RPS. It also reflects the direction and higher order national instruments, which are consistent in recognising that mineral development requires special consideration because of its importance and locational and functional needs. Turning to land and soils in particular, the Regional Council now accepts Oceania's submission that there was no conceiving pathway for mining in the eco chapter and that there needs to be. Recognition of the contribution minerals make to the region is now also proposed in policy in the UFD chapter. There has been a new issue statement proposed recognising that the social, cultural and economic wellbeing of Otago's communities depends on the use and development of natural and physical resources. The task now is to ensure that the document as a whole is consistent with the requirements of section 62 and that the required clarity and logical flow from issues through objectives in policies and methods is in place. The notified version of the regional policy statement used the definition of primary production, which features in the National Planning Standards 2019, and I've set that out there, and you will be familiar with that and note that it includes mining and quarrying as a part of the, it is included within the definition of primary production. In the section 42A report, the ORC suggested distinguishing land-based primary production from primary production as defined above. While there is some logic to this approach in terms of transparently giving effect to the NPS for highly productive land, the approach ORC has adopted has not been to separate out land-based primary production from other primary production, including mining, and to deal with each separately. Instead, the approach has been to narrow the scope of the land and soil section so that it only deals with a subset of primary production. OceanaGold submits that this has left a lacuna for mining and quarrying and possibly other forms of primary production. With the introduction of the NPS for highly productive land, there has been a focus on tying primary production to the land use classification system. While that may work for the food and fibre sector, it is next to meaningless in the context of minerals like gold and silver, whose occurrence is related to geological processes and not soil types. We can be absolutely confident, however, that a similar approach to that used for food and fibre, one that used available land use data, would identify the Hyde-McRae shear zone as the mineral-rich equivalent of land use classification classes 1, 2 and 3. What I'm saying there is that if you ask the geologists at GNS to identify the important locations in Otago for minerals using a system that geologists would understand, the Hyde-McRae shear zone would be at the top of that list. Paragraph 14, just as land-based primary production needs to be able to access and use suitable land on which productive soils are found, so mining and quarrying need to be able to access and use land that contains valuable mineral deposits. To ensure mining and quarrying as regionally important forms of primary production are not lost sight of, OceanaGold has proposed amendments to various objectives and policies, and Ms. Hunter will discuss these with you. These provisions ensure that when the regional policy statement is applied in an integrated way, it enables and provides for extractives whilst ensuring that potential adverse effects are appropriately managed. Objective 13 recognises that Otago supports the full range of primary production activities. This is the full inclusive definition and so includes mining as well as food and fibre production. This then supports the inclusion of policy 21A, which again relates to primary production, not just mining. This policy recognises the benefits of primary production activities as well as the need to ensure that adverse effects are appropriately managed whilst ensuring positive environmental outcomes. And in conclusion, OceanaGold has provided extensive and uncontroverted evidence demonstrating the regional and national importance of its long-established mining activities at Macraes. That importance is demonstrated in significant employment contributions, district and regional economic impacts, and in export earnings, taxes and royalties. The Macraes mine is a major part of Otago's mining industry, an industry that contributes around 4.5% of regional GDP. And it won't be lost on the Commission is that 4.5% is contributed from an astoundingly small footprint relative to other economic activities. High impact footprint, but a small footprint. The locational and functional needs of mining mean that avoidance of adverse effects on other important values, such as productive soils, significant biodiversity, culture and heritage values, and valued landscapes is not always possible as the mineral resource is developed. The best evidence before you indicates that at the Macraes mine, OceanaGold has been able to demonstrate how the intersection between important mineral values and other important values, including significant biodiversity, are able to be managed so that mutually beneficial outcomes are achieved. When it is approached in the right way, it really is possible to have both the protection of important natural values and the benefits that come with development of significant mineral resources. This reality is consistently recognised in national direction that must be given effect to in the RPS. This reality is also reflected in the 2019 partially operative RPS. The failure of the notified RPS to provide this recognition was not supported by any coherent analysis, but is able to be rectified by the Commissioners recommending to ORC the adoption of the various measures that are before you in evidence from Ms. Hunter. Those measures proposed will result in the new RPS meeting the requirements of Section 62 of the Act. In doing so, there will be a clear articulation of the importance of mineral access and development in Otago, which will in turn be supported by appropriate objectives and policies that will guide the making of sensible decisions on future development options that promote sustainable management. So those are my submissions. And if I can just refer you to the case that I handed up, this was a case that was released by the Environment Court yesterday. It's relevant not to the land and soils chapter, but to the eco chapter that I wanted to draw this to your attention. The case effectively it's a case on the on an appeal on the Dunedin City second generation district plan, and it involved the policies relating to biodiversity offsetting, biodiversity compensation in that document. And essentially the appellant in that case, Forest and Bird, was looking to have the provisions from the partially operative RPS, the offsetting and compensation provisions in the partially operative RPS, brought through into the Dunedin district plan. As it turns out, the appellant didn't have scope to run the argument, and so the case was resolved on that basis. But the court went on helpfully to consider the application of Section 293 of the Act and whether the court should, on its own initiative, take steps to allow the provisions of the partially operative plan to be brought through or given effect to in the district plan. The court, in its discretion, has elected not to take that path. And what I wanted to draw to your attention is towards the end of the judgment, from paragraphs 82 onwards, there is some commentary from the court about the issue that I raised with the commissioners, which is the timing issue. So the partially operative RPS provisions relating to biodiversity offsetting and biodiversity compensation was set at a time when Section 104(1)(ab) of the Act wasn't able to be considered. And the court has noted that now that provision is in play, the wording from the partially operative plan is, I think the words used, paragraph 97 of the decision. The court says we accept that the relevant regional policy statement provisions on biodiversity offsets and compensation are a product of their time, and the language of the policies does not reflect the current statutory context. So I submit that's consistent with the submission that I made to you, which is that it's quite inappropriate for the Regional Council to seek to carry forward the wording of the offset and compensation provisions from the partially operative RPS, which was struck in a different statutory context. To bring that forward now into a new regional policy statement in 2023 using that language with presumptive limits is quite inappropriate. Those are my submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Maybe some questions, Alan?
No, thank you very much. Just very clear.
I think your submissions are very helpful, thank you, in terms of the overall picture. And the only thing that, just in probably this week more than anything, and I probably feel a bit apologetic about not raising it previously with you, is that for various reasons during the course of this week, I've been just contemplating whether or not the proposed regional policy statement really recognises the concept of adaptive management in relation to the precautionary approach, and because it doesn't seem to, and we had some exchanges yesterday with Dr. Freeman about that, and I just noticed, as you've been doing the overview, that and thinking back on your case and your presentation, that that's not seen. Well, can I put it this way? I'm asking you: is that a concept or an approach that Oceania has ever given serious thought to, in terms of, for new developments, let's put the toe in the water, see what the effects are for this next tranche, if we can demonstrate that there aren't the adverse effects you're all worried about, well, then we can carry on, etc. Is that an approach that you've looked at?
To a limited extent, I would say yes. It has been a feature of various development proposals that the company has brought forward over the years, probably not expressed in the way that we would talk about adaptive management, and following on from the agriculture cases and so on, with that sort of level of I was going to say sophistication that the Supreme Court has lent to the concept. In many cases, I would submit that the effects of the mining developments aren't uncertain, and so there hasn't been a need to have a more research by learning and so on approach. The technical people have been able to say with quite a degree of confidence what the effects will be and how they ought to be managed to achieve a good outcome. I would submit that implicit in any sophisticated biodiversity management process, where you're talking about taking some sort of remedial action, whether it's compensation or an offset or whatever, built into that is necessarily some degree of adaptation and an ability to, through monitoring success, are we achieving the trajectory that we wanted to achieve? Are we achieving it at the speed that we wanted to? Are there aspects of the biodiversity that are not responding the way that we expected them to, and in which case, how should we amend our approach so that we do better? I don't know of any ecologists that wouldn't subscribe to that as the appropriate way to deal with it. And I think in the typically in biodiversity management plans that I'm familiar with, that kind of adaptive concept is baked in well and truly. Some of the criticism of biodiversity offsetting and compensation that you hear from the likes of Dr. Lloyd perhaps overlooks that and overlooks the degree to which the responsible ecologists that are involved in these projects really do take it upon themselves to look really closely at what's happening. If you look at someone like Dr. Thorson, he's consistently looking at what are there other benefits ecologically that we can achieve here over and above those that relate to the adverse effects of the project. In other words, co-benefits, and can we bank some of that as well? So I don't know whether that's helpful in any way, but
I think it is. It leaves a bit of a gap, though, in terms of a recognition of that linkage of adaptive management, which I think you're probably right when you think about it, in terms of the offsetting and compensation packages, if you like. But then you get without having that sort of structure recognised formally, policy method type approach, you're open to the situation of Dr. Lloyd's of this world saying, well, hang on a moment, that aspect didn't work or whatever. Whereas if you've got a recognition of it in a policy sense, there then is a monitoring, there needs to be a monitoring regime, there needs to be demonstration against standards that we fixed in terms of the monitoring regime in the ecological offset management plan, and as I say,
What's probably happened is that my memory's been jogged of 20 years ago. It's been 20 odd years since I did a whole lot of agriculture cases, but 10 years before the Supreme Court came out with its judgment, we were putting together proposals that were very much staged in terms of monitoring what the extensions would be on particular agricultural proposals, and that if you didn't meet them, you didn't get the next tranche, etc.
Yeah,
And what you've just described in a land sense, in principle, is that same type of approach, linking the offset or whatever, or compensation package, whatever it might be, to a monitored adaptive management regime.
yeah. So just two comments in relation to that. I think that if you look at the suggested amendments to the appendices 3 and 4 that Mark Christensen has suggested in his evidence, whilst I don't think there's any direct reference to adaptive management, I think if you it doesn't take too much imagination to see that in order to secure the sorts of outcomes that are being sought, a decision maker is going to be on inquiry and say, okay, well look, we can be pretty clear what the adverse effects are going to be of your activity, and you're promising that over time we'll achieve a good biodiversity outcome. How are we going to monitor and ensure that the outcome is going to be achieved? And I think that is that's provided for through the process. So it would do no harm if the commissioners wanted to be explicit about that. It would do no harm, because I think that's I don't think there's anything revolutionary about that idea. I think it just accords with good ecological practice. That was the first comment. The second comment is I do think that, at least from my experience anyway, the marine space with aquaculture seems to be subject to more uncertainties about what the actual impacts are going to be, and there seems to be sort of and it's still the case today, an elevated level of adaptation needs to be built in, because no one's quite sure how the benthos is going to respond to a particular change, and so that I think it's probably not using aquaculture is possibly not quite the right analogy with when you're talking about the terrestrial environment. At least in my experience, the ecologists seem to be more confident about what's going on in the terrestrial environment than they are in the marine environment.
Yeah, I suppose what I've seen through the course of these hearings is that they're all very good, genuine people. They're all trying to get to the same position, but they all disagree with each other. And the same tends to happen in the marine sector as well, with the marine biologists. So the pattern of an inability to reach an overall agreement is a bit of a concern, what the adaptive management does is, through monitoring, enable actual proof by actual performance, which takes out a lot of that individual disagreement.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Sir, and I think that the fact that we can never get to the end of ecologists genuinely disagreeing with each other about some fundamental matters, it seems to be that it seems to be what we're the lot we cast in life. That reality, in my submission, should make us really cautious about kind of bright line tests that we set in regional policy statements that, if you like, they're binary. When I'm talking about avoid policies, when you end up in a situation very easily where ecologists will disagree with each other about whether a test is met in a policy, and when you've got no option other than to avoid, that sets you on a really unfortunate trajectory. And my submission is I don't share the distrust that some people seem to share about the Resource Management Act's consenting process to be able to deal with things appropriately. I think that commissioners are well trained. There's some real expertise amongst them, and their ability to sift through proposals and to make good decisions shouldn't be underestimated. And I have a bit of an allergic reaction to the setting of policy, which denies applicants and councils the ability to consider on its merits an application that comes forward.
Oh, look, thank you very much, Mr. Chris. I think it's very helpful. Thank you. That's lovely. Pleased to get into the end.
Yeah, I think this is the last time. A lot of stuff is done. So this is a summary statement for my primary evidence, and it's mainly focused on the land and soil provisions. So starting at paragraph 3, with respect to the land and freshwater chapter of the proposed RPS, OceanaGold made a number of submissions specifically relating to the land and soil provisions, referred to as the LS chapter or section throughout this. Ms. Boyd, at paragraph 95 of her opening statement dated 27th April 2023, acknowledges that the scope of the LS section has been a subject of some debate, and a number of submitters seek either new objectives and/or policies to address additional matters relating to land. OceanaGold is one of these submitters. I propose a new objective and policy for the LS chapter. Proposed objective 013, which seeks to recognise the role of resource land and development within the Otago region, excuse me, and its contribution to enabling people and communities to provide for their social, economic, and cultural well-being. Ms. Boyd did not agree, did not agree that this objective was appropriate on the basis that it was too broad and did not appropriately sit within the LS chapter of the plan of the policy statement, as it only manages land and soil resources. Ms. Boyd remains concerned that the suite of policies in this subsection would be unlikely to achieve the objective, as they do not collectively address all resource use and development. I propose this objective largely because it is my view the proposed policy statement, as it was notified, lacks sufficient balance. There is a strong protectionist theme throughout the notified version, and if it remains unaltered, it will set in place a highly limiting policy basis of avoidance of almost all effects, and its protective doctrine will have significant implications for development and resource use in Otago. As it stands, the notified RPS fails to properly recognise that primary production and rural industries provide the economic impetus for Otago's economy, and there is a paucity of meaningful provisions in the notified version which recognise that the use and development of land and soil resources by the primary sector is essential for the region's economic and social well-being. It seems to me that Ms. Boyd's view that this chapter is not the place for the inclusion of more balanced provisions is also shared by the other reporting officers in relation to the chapters of the policy statement that each need to address, such that the reporting officer's position seems to be that there is no place within the proposed policy statement where such provisions can be included. Further limitations are suggested by Ms. Boyd in her supplementary evidence dated 11th October 2022. There she recommends that the term primary production in the LS chapter be replaced throughout with the term food and fibre production. Upon the NPS for highly productive land taking effect, Ms. Boyd recommended adopting the term land-based primary production as defined in that document. While I accept that the proposed policy statement is required to give effect to the NPS HPL, I do not think that document provides a basis for limiting or failing to provide for other primary-based activities that are of importance to the Otago region. It is not necessary to take a one-dimensional approach. As the chapter in the RPS, which is assigned to the management of land and soil, I remain of the view that it would be appropriate to also include provisions recognising other primary productive activities, such as mining. It is a natural fit to include such a provision here, and I have recommended some amendments in Appendix A to the summary statement, which I'll get to later and talk you through. In terms of Section 32AA, providing clarity regarding the use of land for other types of primary production through an objective and policy in the LS chapter contributes to achieving the purpose of the RMA by clearly highlighting that there are other uses of land that are not land-based primary production, but are also important in enabling communities to provide for their social and economic well-being. I also consider these provisions to be appropriately supported by the industry issue statement that has been agreed between a number of planners acting for various submitters. I also remain of the view that the proposed policy statement needs to expressly acknowledge the importance of the mineral and extractors industry in Otago. A significant mineral asset lies within the Mercays mine in Otago. Otago has a unique characteristics in this regard when compared to many other regions, and I do not think that this can be ignored at the RPS level. This has been recognised by Ms. Boyd, who has agreed in her earlier statements of evidence that there is merit in some parts of the amendments that are being sought by OceanaGold. These relate to recognition of the benefits of mineral and aggregate extraction for the provision of infrastructure and the social and economic well-being of Otago's communities, and recognition of the locational constraints faced by these activities. In her supplementary statement of evidence at paragraph 81, Ms. Boyd states that mining and aggregate extraction does not clearly fit within any of the chapters of the proposed policy statement. The two most appropriate, in her opinion, are the LF-LS subsection and the UFD chapter as identified by OceanaGold. Having considered the proposed amendments as well as the scope and intent of both chapters, Ms. Boyd considers that the UFD chapter is the most appropriate place for additional policy direction. This is primarily because the UFD chapter manages rural areas and the activities likely to occur within them, including carbon reduction, includes mining and quarrying. Ms. Boyd provided an amendment to UFD P7 rural areas, which has been superseded by the wholesale redrafting of the UFD chapter by Ms. White. At paragraph 5.35 of my primary statement of evidence, I expressed a preference for these provisions to sit within the LS-LF chapter. This was on the basis that mineral assets may exist on land anywhere, not just within the rural environment. While that remains a valid statement, I am less concerned with where the provisions sit in the document, only that they exist somewhere within it and that they've properly recognised the significance of this activity in a regional context. While I acknowledge the changes that have been suggested to the proposed policy statement post its notification regarding mineral extraction and mining activities, I remain perplexed by the reticence shown by reporting officers towards this issue. As I have set out in my evidence, the current drafting of the proposed policy statement compares poorly against the 2019 partially operative RPS in this regard. That version of the RPS appropriately recognised the importance of the mining and extraction activities in Otago, acknowledged its locational constraints, and provided a consenting pathway for such projects where there may be unavoidable conflicts with significant natural values or resources. This approach is also similar to provisions which exist in other regional policy statements in New Zealand, which have significant mineral assets and mining activities operating in their regions, such as the West Coast and the Waikato regions. Ms. Boyd is of the view that we have met in the middle as much as we are going to on this matter. More specifically, Ms. Boyd notes that we continue to disagree that an additional policy setting out a specific management framework for mineral and aggregate extraction is necessary. I remain of the view that this pathway is necessary. There is evidence from OceanaGold, Fulton Hogan, Greymont, and other submitters who have clearly demonstrated that mineral extraction and mining activities can only occur within mineral resources present, and that their activities are vitally important for the social, economic, and cultural well-being of Otago. It is not my opinion that any proposed mining activity should be enabled without due and proper consideration of the environmental effects that accrue. I do, however, consider it reasonable that mining proposals should be able to be explored and assessed in terms of both their benefits and their effects on the environment in an appropriately balanced way, with a clear acknowledgement that where development is able to proceed, it may not be possible to avoid all adverse effects on all values due to the locational and functional constraints such activities are subject to. In such circumstances, where there are adverse effects on important values, I hold the strong view that the proposed policy statement should require methods to be employed to ensure that good or better environmental outcomes are ultimately achieved as a result of the proposal proceeding. In my opinion, a pathway for mineral extraction and mining activities is necessary so that local authorities are able to find policy support within the RPS for recognising the benefits derived from mineral extraction and mining activities, addressing potential reverse sensitivity issues and other issues such as those associated with the locational needs of such activities, and the management of adverse effects from mineral extraction and processing activities. This pathway, in my view, could comfortably sit under the amendments to the redrafted UFD chapter, which now recognises the locational constraints of mineral extraction activities as well as its benefits. And I've provided some drafting to this effect in Appendix B. Now just turning to Appendix A, this is the land and soil provisions. And to explain the various colours, the red is the ORC section 42A amendments as they're being released. The black was their initial changes, I think it was, and the blue is my suggested changes as of today's date. And these provisions, just a sort of disclaimer, are similar to what's attached to my primary evidence, but they're in a different order. So I think in my primary statement, I attached these to the UFD chapter and the pathway for mineral extraction, which is in the UFD one now, was in the land and soils provision. So it's just a bit of a flip, but essentially the same. And so there I've proposed objective 013, which is access to and use of land and soil resources, which reads to recognise that Otago supports a range of primary production activities which require appropriate access to and use of land and soil resources. As I've said in the summary, that I think there are more than just land-based primary production, which also require access to and use of land and soil resources. So that's reasonably self-explanatory, that objective. And then flipping over a few pages to page 10. I have proposed a policy that is specific to all primary production, land-based or otherwise, and there it sets out that providing for the management of land and soils in Otago in a way which also provides for the continued operation, maintenance and development of primary production activities by recognising the value and long-term benefits of that activity to the economic, social and cultural well-being of the region, and ensuring that adverse effects associated with primary production are appropriately managed, and maintaining, where appropriate, enhancing access to natural and physical resources, avoiding or minimising the potential for reverse sensitivity, and ensuring positive environmental outcomes achieved. And that's it in terms of the LS provisions. And then just turning to Appendix B, the UFD, the Urban Form and Development. And to explain the key there, I've used the base document that I think was attached to Ms. White's 30th of March supplementary evidence. And the blue changes are my changes as of today's date. And so just changing UFD 02 to refer to primary production activities rather than just viability of the rural sector. That is consistent with what's set out in 1, where it talks about provides for the ongoing use of rural areas for primary production, supported by rural industry in appropriate locations, and does not compromise the productive capacity, long-term viability of primary production activities and rural communities. And then UFD P7, I've talked about these changes in other evidence, where I thought it could be a little bit unclear, where in 3, where it says provides for primary production, rural industry and supporting activities, and recognises the importance of mineral and aggregate resources for the provision of infrastructure and the social, whether that and could be read as it's only for infrastructure resources that you can recognise the benefits of mineral and aggregate resources. So just switching that, putting it so it reads the importance of mineral and aggregate resources for the social and economic well-being of Otago's communities, including for the provision of infrastructure. Just some minor other changes there. And then on the next page, page 14, is the proposed pathway for mineral and aggregate extraction, which I think does fit comfortably under P7, which does recognise the locational and functional constraints and benefits of this activity specifically, which is similar to the way the infrastructure chapter is drafted. And this pathway is a bit of a hybrid between the 2019 RPS pathway and how it's shaping for the infrastructure pathway under the current 2021 RPS. So there it reads that where mineral and aggregate extraction and its ancillary activities provide a significant regional and national benefit, manage activities arising from such activities by avoiding, as the first priority, locating in a list of locations. And I have preferred, where appropriate, to refer to the scheduled locations so that it's clear. So when you're picking up a plan, you know where those locations are. And otherwise have tried to use the definitions, for example, significant natural areas, which is defined, natural wetlands also defined. Have also included areas subject to significant natural hazard risk, because the way that chapter is shaping, there are a number of avoids within that, which would potentially present a conflict for Oceania Gold's activities. And also that's consistent with the way the 2019 RPS was drafted. And then in B, if it's not practical to avoid locating within those areas because of the functional needs or operational needs of the activities, manage the adverse effects as follows. Waihi Te Puna reference back to that relevant policy in significant natural areas or natural wetlands as defined, referring to the effects management hierarchy, which that links to the suggested changes we've made to the eco provisions, which only now refers to the, includes a definition of that. So rather than referring to the eco policy or whatever it is, it's just the definition that we've suggested should be included. Number 3 is minimise any increase in natural hazard risk through mitigation measures. That is consistent with the 2019 pathway. And then 4 is the protocol that would apply to locate in any of those other areas, for example, areas of high heritage value. You'd work through a process of avoiding significant adverse effects where practicable. And if that's not the case, avoiding, remedying or mitigating all the other adverse effects, and then where adverse effects cannot be practically remediated or mitigated, consider offsetting and then compensation as appropriate. And there I refer to offsetting and compensation more broadly and not linked to the biodiversity offsetting and biodiversity compensation, which we've also suggested in terms of definitions. And so that would mean, you know, for example, a heritage item, you might be able to pick it up and place it somewhere else and also enhance some of its features, potentially could be seen as a offsetting or compensation in a heritage sense. And then number C is avoiding adverse effects on the health and safety of the community, which is consistent with what was in the 2019 pathway.
Thank you. Maybe some questions, Ellen?
Thanks, Ms. Hunter. Question not really on content because we've seen a lot of this. And I know you. I do have one question which I'll come back to. I know you said in your paragraph 12 that you don't really care too much where they sit as long as they're in there. I'm really confused about the structure of all this, and I think it might be the planning standards have led to this. Have you, and actually the chair's got a full page coming back to us, to actually have a look at that. There is a request for a rural domain chapter. And if that was accepted by the panel as being appropriate, having a rural domain chapter, we're trying to work out whether we can do it under an RPS and how that would occur. Where do you think all this should sit? It's bizarre that all this stuff is in an urban form development chapter, and you've got a bob each way, really,
Yeah, well,
and
I mean,
freshwater, and I would have thought land freshwater's area that covers most of the rural zone, I guess.
I think that we're a little bit confused too, and that is the issue we're all grappling with, because, as I say in my primary statement, I suggested that those provisions relating to primary production and mineral extraction should be in the land and soils chapter, because I thought that was a better fit, because when we're dealing with mineral extraction, we're necessarily going through the soil into the land resource. So for me that did sit there, but then as events have occurred, the ORC seemed to prefer that those types of provisions live within the urban form and development chapter. So, and have made those changes, which Oceania agree with in terms of, they're quite positive changes to the UFD chapter in terms of outcome. But yeah, I'm like you, I'm quite confused, and I think naturally it sits better in the land and soil chapter.
Yeah. But I understand that this approach in Wellington or Auckland, where you have really regional councils managing a large urban area. Taylor's probably 97% rural. It just doesn't make sense.
Agree, yeah. And I think that we are quite confused, my colleagues, as to what the urban form and development chapter really means, and is it rural, is it not? And also the issue of particularly for minerals, is that they aren't necessarily going to be in the rural zone. You know, you've got quarries that might be in urban areas and things like that.
And where that leads to is you have relevant bits sort of all over the place. And I know you've got to consider all these things, but they're all kind of dealing with the same thing,
Yes.
sitting in different zones. It's, well, domains or whatever you call them.
Yeah, and I think even the land base, which is what has been dealt with under the NPS for HPL, that features within the UFD chapter as well. So there's crossover. Yeah, so it's
You'd almost go, we're not having any domains. Here's our policy set for everything in one sheet.
well, I guess it should
You don't
still.
do that, you go to.
Yeah, and it should still follow what section 62 says in terms of what are the key issues for Otago.
Can I, sorry, Alan, can I just chip in with a comment here? I know I've already had my turn, but I agree with you that the national planning standards have made it complicated, and rather, so they're meant to help us. They help us because they help us because everyone's in the same muddle now. But that's not much help when you're trying to write it. And I accept that it's a difficult issue. It seemed to me obvious when I first picked up the notified document that where minerals needed to be addressed primarily was in the land and soils, because that's where primary production features most prominently. And I think what's confused things is that along came the highly productive land NPS, and that has to be given effect to. And so the land and soils chapter lost its focus on primary production and instead focused just on that subset of primary production. And I think Ms. Hunter's initial approach was to prefer that chapter as the place to deal with everything. And I think that's the most logical place. And I think that if excuse me, I'm putting forward, if it's dealt with in the UFD chapter, that would do the job, but it's less satisfactory. And I agree. I've never been able to understand why a chapter that starts with urban form is the place to deal with minerals. It's
Or any rural.
well, yeah. Anyway, it's strange.
Yeah. And I'm not criticising ORC for
No.
that. It's like that standard. It's just someone in Wellington sitting here and they think, this is a good idea, let's do this. Without actually looking what happens in the real world. The only on the drafting one, your last one, the UFD, so you get down into B4 and you got your 3 steps there. The question just sort of occurred to me was, well, what happens in one, avoiding significant adverse effects where practicable, and if you can't do that, because 2 just talked about other adverse effects. Does it drop into 2? Is it meant to drop into 2 if you can't avoid? And plus the other adverse effects you're into an avoiding, remedying, mitigating scenario.
Yes, that should be the way it's read. Yeah.
Does it read that way? I guess is probably the question. Probably a question for Stephen, I guess.
I wonder whether the solution, Claire, would be in little Roman 3 to say where adverse effects cannot be practically avoided, remediated, or mitigated.
Yeah.
Would pick that up.
And
Yeah.
just one extra word in there that can help trick.
Yes, that would work. Yeah, it is certainly the intent that you should be able to read.
I get what you're trying to say there. It's just that someone will go, well, you haven't actually picked that up, so you can just carry on.
Sorry, what was that phrase?
So I was looking at
Little Roman 3.
which begins where adverse effects cannot be practically remediated, and I've added an avoided before remediated. So that then links you back to little Roman 1, which says, avoid if you can, and then you drop down to 3, and if you couldn't avoid, and that would take you through to remediate, mitigate, or then down to offsetting and compensation as appropriate.
Chapters 1 and 2 and 3. So
Yeah.
covered everything. No, that's not a question now. So no, thanks for that.
You know, Alan took my questions actually.
Oh, sorry.
But thank you for all your input and well thought out submissions through the process. It's been really helpful.
They complain when I change around who goes first. And that they don't have time to think, but then they complain that they didn't have their questions taken.
We don't complain. Just making that mistake.
Just a minor technical clarification if I can. First, some of the or two of them, sorry, just on the UFD one. Right at the start, you've got a change from objective 4 to 2.
Oh, that was just, I was just trying to be tidy, because it's, the clean version has, I think, an objective 1, and then it goes to an objective 4 in Ms. White's version.
Oh, I see.
So, but you can keep it as 4 if you like.
Right. Okay. So you weren't suggesting we needed to change. Yeah. Okay. So, right. And then the next one was on the next page. Again, the numeral 1 in B4. What
Yeah.
should that be?
Oh, yes, you're right, that should be an A.
It should be
It
A.
should be A.
Right. Okay. Yes, I mean, if I've got a clear picture, really, what you're suggesting to us, that it's really requiring both Appendix A and Appendix B to be rather than putting a package, if you like, in one or other UFD or the land and soil.
Yes, and as I said at the start, I think I had these flipped originally, so I had the specific mineral extraction provision within the land and soils, because that did feel like a more natural fit,
Right.
and the pathway sat within there. And then we had, we've made some changes to the urban form development. I think it was a rural policy that talked about primary production. So I suggested some changes there in terms of my primary limits, just to sort of.
I suppose what I'm really getting at is that if we find that the planning standards, you know, are directory to an extent where we've got to use this format with one or other of these chapters, is it not better to amalgamate your appendices A and B together and put them in one or other chapter?
That would probably be preferable and make a lot of sense, yes.
Yeah. Now, look, thank you, and thank you both very much. It's been a very helpful presentation this morning, and time as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to the panel for the way that you've engaged with Oceana Gold's submission throughout. It's really appreciated, and I know it's difficult material, and it's you're grappling with some quite complex issues and trying to work out how you weave them all into the plan. And so we wish you well for the rest of the process. Thank you.
We're just intrigued. Did you file a submission in the freshwater process?
Yes,
You did. Right. So we're seeing you back.
I fear so.
Okay. Good stuff. Thank you.
We'll see you then.
Alex.
I'm not sure whether you were aware, you probably are, but we're formally appointed as the panel for those hearings as of 10 May.
Oh, great. So this is in the four of you.
Yes.
That's excellent. Yeah, well, that resolves some of the challenges that you were confronting.
Challenges where you were watching who we spoke to. All fall away.
Yeah.
We've only got one brain.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure I've got one brain. It's hard to brain.
Mr. Logan, is there anything else that we haven't touched on or need to address?
Not that I can recall. I think the matters you left with me, I was able to address it in yesterday's session. So
We've got Monday and Tuesday.
Okay. Thank you. That's very cool. obviously hasn't come out with any Auto Tago decision.
No.
Do they know we're waiting?
Well, Mr. Anderson was bold enough to tell them that. That didn't
Didn't
induce
matter.
a response.
Did he file a memorandum?
Yes.
Did he? There's a second.
Talk to the hand, said the court.
What's that, sorry?
The court said, talk to the hand.
Okay, thanks very much.
So we're going here, Ainsley. Probably listening, noting their excitement.
So just in case Ainsley was listening, that's the end of us today. Right, thank you.